The conference chamber aboard the orbital station Meridian Point stretched nearly 2 kilometers in length, its vaulted ceiling lost in artificial twilight. For 300 years, this space had hosted the Galactic Assembly, where representatives from 47 member species gathered to resolve disputes, negotiate treaties, and maintain the fragile peace that held the known galaxy together. The chamber's architecture reflected this purpose with deliberate grandeur. Crystalline walls curved upward in sweeping arcs, their surfaces etched with the founding principles of the assembly in every known language. Gravity generators maintained a comfortable standard throughout, adjusted sector by sector to accommodate species ranging from the massive Kryn to the delicate Veshari. Today, however, the grandeur felt hollow. The chamber buzzed with tension so thick it seemed to press against the walls. Delegates huddled in species-specific clusters, their conversations sharp and urgent. Translation fields flickered overhead like angry fireflies, struggling to keep pace with the multilingual chaos. At the center of it all, the mediation platform stood empty, its control console dark. The Assembly's chief mediator had resigned 14 hours ago, the third to do so in as many weeks. Council Director Ven stood at the observation deck overlooking the chaos, his 4 primary eyes tracking the disorder below while his secondary pair scanned the data streaming across his personal display. The Threnics were known throughout the galaxy for their patience and analytical precision, qualities that had made them natural administrators of the Assembly's bureaucratic machinery. Ven had served in this capacity for 62 years, long enough to recognize when the system was approaching catastrophic failure. The current crisis centered on the Hellion Corridor, a strategically vital region of space that connected 3 major trade routes. 6 months ago, the Drazen Collective had claimed historical rights to the corridor based on archaeological evidence dating back 12,000 years. The Orathi Commonwealth immediately countered with their own historical claim, supported by different archaeological findings that supposedly predated the Drazen evidence by 5 centuries. What followed was a cascade of escalating tensions that threatened to unravel centuries of careful diplomatic work. Both sides had mobilized their fleets. Trade had ground to a halt. 3 dozen neutral systems had been dragged into the dispute as both parties demanded declarations of support. The Assembly's traditional mediation protocols had failed spectacularly. Every proposed compromise was rejected before the ink dried on the data cores. Every attempt to establish neutral zones was sabotaged by incidents that each side blamed on the other. The situation was deteriorating by the hour. Ven's secondary assistant, a young Veshari named Lyra, approached with visible agitation. Her gossamer wings trembled, and her telepathic field projected anxiety so strongly that Ven felt it even through his natural shields. She carried a datapad clutched in her primary manipulators, her bioluminescent patterns flickering in distressed colors. The situation below has reached critical mass, she transmitted directly into his mind, the telepathic message carrying undertones of genuine fear. The Drazen ambassador just threatened to withdraw from the Assembly entirely if their demands are not met within 48 hours. The Orathi have responded by moving their battle fleet to the corridor's edge. We are looking at the real possibility of the first major war between Assembly members in 3 centuries. Ven's mandibles clicked in frustration, a gesture that in Threnix culture conveyed both acknowledgement and resignation. "Have we exhausted all traditional options?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Lyra's pattern shifted to a muted blue, the color of uncomfortable truth. Every mediator on our roster has attempted intervention. The Elders of Wisdom declined to participate, citing concerns about precedent. The consensus builders withdrew after their proposals were rejected 43 times in succession. The situation has moved beyond our standard protocols, Director. We are operating in uncharted territory. The weight of failure pressed down on Ven's shoulders. 300 years of peace, countless treaties and agreements that had bound the galaxy together in mutual prosperity and understanding, all of it threatened by a dispute that should have been resolvable through standard channels. The Assembly's reputation as the guarantor of galactic stability hung in the balance. If they could not resolve this crisis, what purpose did they serve? He was about to dismiss Lyra when a junior analyst from the records department approached with unusual urgency. The Corven's exoskeleton plates shifted nervously, creating a soft clicking sound that drew Ven's attention. "Director," the analyst began, his translator struggling slightly with the rapid pace of his speech, "I may have found something relevant. I was conducting a comprehensive search through our database of affiliated civilizations, looking for any species with documented success in conflict resolution. The parameters were extremely broad, but one result appeared that I initially dismissed as an error." Ven's primary eyes focused on the analyst while his secondary pair continued monitoring the chaos below. "Explain." "There is a species called humanity," the analyst continued, transferring data to Ven's display. "They inhabit a single system in what we classify as Sector 447, far from the major trade routes. They were granted provisional observer status 40 years ago, though they have never participated in assembly proceedings. Their application materials were quite unremarkable, which is why they attracted minimal attention. However, their cultural database contains some unusual information." The analyst's display showed a three-dimensional map of human history, compressed into a visual timeline that spanned roughly 10,000 years of recorded civilization. What immediately caught Ven's attention was the density of conflicts marked throughout that timeline. Wars, revolutions, territorial disputes, ideological confrontations. The sheer volume was staggering compared to most species in the Assembly, whose pre-spaceflight histories typically showed periods of unity following their initial technological emergence. Yet despite this apparent chaos, the analyst continued, they achieved remarkable stability in their modern era. Their planetary government has maintained peace for over 2 centuries. More significantly, their historical records show numerous instances of seemingly intractable conflicts being resolved through unconventional means. I thought it might be worth reviewing their methods, given our current situation. Venn studied the data with growing interest. Humanity's history was certainly violent by galactic standards, filled with conflicts over territory, resources, ideology, and countless other causes. But the analyst was correct. Embedded within that history were patterns of successful conflict resolution that appeared genuinely novel, methods that seemed, at first glance, counterintuitive or even absurd, yet had produced lasting results. Lyra moved closer, her curiosity temporarily overriding her anxiety. "What kind of methods?" she asked. The analyst highlighted several examples from the database. Documented instances include something they call shuttle diplomacy, where a mediator travels repeatedly between parties who refuse to meet directly. There are records of conflicts resolved through what they term back-channel negotiations, informal discussions that occur outside official frameworks. They have extensively practiced confidence-building measures, small cooperative actions designed to establish trust incrementally. Perhaps most unusual are their historical examples of what they call proximity talks, where hostile parties are placed in the same location, but communicate only through intermediaries. These methods seemed bizarrely roundabout to Ven's analytical mind. The Assembly's protocols emphasized direct communication, transparent processes, and logical frameworks. The idea of parties refusing to speak directly to each other or conducting negotiations through informal channels ran counter to everything the Assembly had built its reputation upon. Yet he could not dismiss the evidence. Humanity had emerged from their violent past into a stable civilization. Perhaps there was wisdom in their unconventional approaches. "Do we have contact information for their delegation?" Venn asked. The analyst nodded. "They maintain a small diplomatic mission on the outer ring of the station. Their observer status gives them access to assembly proceedings, though they rarely utilize it. According to station records, their current representative is a woman named Kate Morrison. She has been in this position for approximately 3 standard years." Venn made his decision quickly. The The situation was desperate enough to warrant unconventional solutions. Even if humanity's methods proved ineffective, they could hardly make things worse than they already were. "Contact her immediately," he ordered. "Request her presence at my office within the hour. Frame it as an urgent consultation on a matter of galactic importance." The analyst departed to carry out the directive while Venn turned his attention back to the chaos below. The Drazen and Orathi delegations had moved their confrontation to opposite ends of the chamber, their respective support blocks forming around them like battle lines. The symbolism was ominous. The assembly chamber, designed to bring species together, had become a visualization of division. Kate Morrison arrived at Venn's office 53 minutes later, escorted by 2 assembly security personnel who departed once she entered. She was tall by human standards, perhaps 175 centimeters, with dark hair pulled back in a practical style. Her clothing was simple but professional, a dark suit that would have been unremarkable in any diplomatic setting. What struck Venn immediately was her expression. Her face conveyed careful attention and controlled curiosity, but there was something else present, something his species had learned to recognize after centuries of diplomatic service. She was assessing the situation with the practiced eye of someone who understood the unspoken dynamics of power and desperation. "Director Venn," she greeted him with a slight nod, her translator rendering her words into flawless galactic standard. "I received your message. How can humanity be of service to the assembly?" Venn gestured toward the seating area where he had prepared refreshments suitable for human metabolism. "Please, be comfortable. I apologize for the urgent nature of my summons, but we face a crisis that has exceeded our traditional capabilities. I believe your species may possess insights that could prove valuable." Kate sat with fluid grace, her posture conveying attention without tension. She waited for him to continue, demonstrating the kind of patience that Venn appreciated. Too many diplomats felt compelled to fill silence with unnecessary speech. He explained the situation in detail, outlining the Hellion Corridor dispute, the escalating tensions between the Drazen and Orathi, and the repeated failures of standard mediation protocols. Kate listened without interruption, her expression remaining neutral but her eyes tracking every detail he provided. When he finished, she sat quietly for several moments, processing the information. "May I ask some questions?" she said finally. "Of course." "How long have the Drazen and Orathi been members of the Assembly?" "The Drazen joined 240 years ago. The Orathi 193 years ago. Have they worked together on previous matters?" Venn accessed his records extensively. They co-chaired the Outer Rim Development Committee for 60 years. They collaborated on the Sigma Accord, which established standardized trade protocols for emerging civilizations. Their relationship has historically been cordial, even warm by interspecies standards. Kate nodded slowly. "And how have the mediations been structured?" "According to assembly protocols," Venn explained. "Both parties present their positions in the main chamber. The mediator facilitates discussion, helping them identify common ground and potential compromises. All proceedings are recorded and made available to the general membership to ensure transparency. So every word they say is public record." "Yes, transparency is one of our founding principles. It prevents backroom dealings and ensures accountability." Kate was quiet again, her gaze distant as she processed this information. Then she looked directly at Venn with an expression that might have been sympathy. "Director, I think I see part of your problem. Your system is designed for good faith disputes between parties who genuinely want resolution. But what happens when the dispute itself becomes secondary to other concerns?" Venn felt a spike of confusion. "I do not understand. The Hellion Corridor is clearly the central issue." "Is it though?" Kate asked gently. "You said these two species have a long history of cooperation. They successfully worked together for decades on complex projects. Now they are suddenly intractable over an archaeological claim. That seems unusual." She leaned forward slightly. "In human diplomacy, we have learned that the stated issue is not always the real issue." Sometimes conflicts persist because resolving them would require one or both parties to lose face publicly. Sometimes the parties have painted themselves into corners with their own rhetoric and do not know how to back down without appearing weak. Sometimes there are domestic political pressures that make compromise appear impossible, even when both sides privately recognize that compromise is necessary. The words struck Venn with uncomfortable force. He had been so focused on the technical aspects of the dispute, the archaeological evidence and territorial claims, that he had not considered these deeper dynamics. But Kate's analysis made immediate sense. The Drazen leadership had made very public declarations about their historical rights. The Orathi had responded in kind. Both sides had mobilized significant resources and made promises to their populations. Any retreat now would look like capitulation. "You believe they are trapped by their own positions," he said slowly. "I think it is possible. And your transparent system, while admirable in principle, makes it impossible for them to explore compromise privately. Every word is recorded, every gesture analyzed. Neither side can risk appearing weak or uncertain. They are performing for their domestic audiences as much as negotiating with each other." "If you are correct," Venn said, "then our entire approach has been counterproductive. We have been providing them with a public stage where neither can afford to show flexibility." Kate's expression softened. "I do not mean to criticize your system, Director. Transparency has enormous value, but there are times when parties need privacy to be honest, both with each other and with themselves. They need space to explore options without commitment, to voice doubts without consequence, to consider compromises without immediately being held to them." Venn's mind raced through the implications. Everything Kate was describing ran counter to assembly doctrine. Back-channel negotiations, private discussions, unofficial explorations. These seemed like invitations to corruption and manipulation, yet he could not deny the logic of her argument. The current approach had failed completely. Perhaps it was time to consider methods that felt uncomfortable precisely because they were unfamiliar. "What would you suggest?" he asked. Kate took a breath, and Venn sensed she was choosing her words carefully. "I would suggest we begin with what we call shuttle diplomacy. I would meet privately with each delegation, separately. Not in any official capacity, just informal conversations. I would listen to their concerns without judgment, without recording, without any commitment to action. I would try to understand not just what they say they want, but what they actually need. And then I would look for areas where their needs might align, even if their stated positions do not. I would explore potential compromises that might allow both sides to claim some measure of success. And I would do all of this quietly, away from public scrutiny, giving them space to be flexible without losing face." The suggestion made Venn deeply uncomfortable. It violated so many principles he had built his career upon. Yet what alternative did he have? The assembly was on the brink of its first major war in 3 centuries. Traditional methods had failed. Sometimes, he realized, desperation was the price of wisdom. "How quickly could you begin?" he asked. Kate met his gaze steadily. "Immediately, if you grant me the authority." Venn made his decision. The weight of it settled on his shoulders like physical pressure, but he did not waver. "Very well. I am appointing you as special mediator for this crisis. You will have full access to all relevant information and the authority to conduct negotiations as you see fit. I will inform both delegations that they should cooperate with your efforts." Kate stood, and there was something in her posture that reminded Venn of warriors preparing for battle. "Thank you for your trust, Director. I will do everything in my power to justify it." The next 72 hours became a blur of activity that felt simultaneously urgent and glacially slow. Kate established her operations in a small conference room far from the main chamber, a deliberate choice that signaled these would not be formal proceedings. She began with the Drazen delegation, arriving at their quarters unannounced and requesting a private conversation with their senior ambassador. Ambassador Corinth received her with visible suspicion. The Drazen were a proud species, their culture built around concepts of honor and historical memory. Corinth himself was elderly by Drazen standards, his scaled skin showing the pale coloration of advanced age. He had served his people for nearly a century, and his reputation for uncompromising integrity was well established. A human mediator, he said, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into standard. Forgive my bluntness, but your species has no standing in this assembly. What qualifies you to involve yourself in this matter? Kate settled into the seat across from him with relaxed composure. Nothing, Ambassador. I have no standing, no formal qualifications, and no authority beyond what Director Venn has temporarily granted me. I am simply someone who has studied conflict resolution and who might offer a different perspective. If you find our conversation unhelpful, you are free to ask me to leave at any time. The honesty seemed to catch Corinth off guard. He studied her for a long moment, his lateral eyes shifting independently as he assessed her from multiple angles. Very well. What do you wish to discuss? I would like to understand your position, Kate said. Not the official version that has been presented in the chamber, but the actual concerns that keep you awake at night. What do you really need from this situation? Corinth's response came quickly, almost reflexively. We need recognition of our historical claim to the Hellion Corridor. Our ancestors developed that region 12,000 years ago. It is part of our heritage, our identity as a people. To surrender it would be to deny our own history. Kate nodded slowly. I understand that is what you need publicly, but privately, Ambassador, what do you actually need? Because from my reading of the situation, you have already achieved something important. The entire galaxy now knows about your historical claim. The archaeological evidence has been thoroughly documented. Your people's ancient achievements have been recognized and celebrated. So what else do you need? The question hung in the air between them. Corinth's initial response died on his lips, replaced by a long silence. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried a weariness that had not been present before. I need to go home, he said quietly. I need to tell my people that their history matters, that their sacrifices were not forgotten. But I also need to avoid a war that will destroy everything we have built. My government's position is clear, but between us, I know that actual control of the corridor is less important than what it represents. Kate leaned forward slightly. What if there was a way to honor your historical claim while finding a practical solution for the corridor's administration? What if recognition and control did not have to be the same thing? Corinth's eyes focused sharply on her. What do you mean? I am just thinking out loud, Kate said carefully. No commitments, no official proposals. But suppose the corridor was formally recognized as historically Drazen, with monuments and educational programs celebrating your ancestors' achievements. At the same time, suppose its administration was handled by a neutral body, perhaps even jointly by multiple species, with the Drazen having a permanent leadership role. You would have your recognition, the galaxy would have its stability, and everyone could claim a measure of success. The ambassador was quiet again, but Kate could see his mind working through the implications. It was not a perfect solution, but it addressed his core needs while providing flexibility on the details. She let the silence extend, giving him space to consider. I cannot speak for my government, Corinth said finally, but if such an arrangement could be structured properly, if the historical recognition was genuine and prominent, it might be something worth exploring. Privately, you understand. No commitments. Of course, Kate agreed. This was just a conversation between two people trying to understand each other. She spent the next 6 hours with the Orathi delegation, engaging in a similar dance of careful exploration. Ambassador Thurin was younger than Corinth, but no less proud. The Orathi culture valued logical precision and factual accuracy above all else. Their counterclaim to the Hellion Corridor was built on meticulous archaeological analysis that, they believed, definitively predated the Drazen evidence. The challenge with Thurin was different. Where Corinth needed emotional acknowledgement of his people's history, Thurin needed intellectual validation. He needed to believe that any solution was logically sound, supported by evidence, and intellectually defensible. Kate approached it methodically. She spent hours reviewing the Orathi archaeological data, asking detailed questions, and demonstrating genuine interest in their findings. Only after she had established her respect for their scientific rigor did she begin exploring alternatives. "Your evidence is compelling," she said carefully. "The dating appears sound, the analysis thorough. But I wonder if we might be asking the wrong question. The archaeological dispute is about who was there first, which may be technically answerable but practically irrelevant to current needs. What if instead we asked how we can best serve the region's needs now, while respecting all historical contributions?" Thurin's crystalline eyes reflected the room's light in complex patterns, a sign of deep thought in his species. "Explain." "The Hellion corridor serves the entire galaxy," Kate said. "It is too strategically important to be under single-species control, regardless of historical claims. What if we designed a governance structure that acknowledged all historical connections while ensuring neutral, efficient administration? A model that could actually work better than any single-species solution." She could see him processing this, his analytical mind recognizing the logical appeal. "That would require the Drazen to surrender their claim," he pointed out. "Would it though?" Kate asked. "Or would it require them to accept a different kind of recognition? Historical significance versus administrative control. These are not the same thing. Your archaeological work proves the region has a complex history involving multiple species. That is a finding worth celebrating, not disputing." The conversation continued deep into the night cycle, carefully building a framework that might satisfy both sides' core needs without requiring either to surrender their fundamental positions. Kate worked tirelessly, moving between delegations, carrying ideas and concerns, slowly constructing bridges of understanding. After 3 days of intense private negotiations, she presented Ven with a proposal. It was complex, carefully balanced, and included elements that neither side had initially considered. The Hellion corridor would be recognized as a region of profound historical significance to multiple species, with the Drazen contributions given prominent acknowledgement in perpetuity. The region would be administered by a neutral council with permanent Drazen and Orathi co-chairs, ensuring both species had genuine influence over its future. Trade revenue would be shared according to a formula that benefited the entire assembly while providing special considerations for historical stakeholders. Most importantly, the entire agreement was structured around principles of shared heritage and cooperative management, transforming a zero-sum dispute into a collaborative opportunity. Ven reviewed the proposal with growing amazement. It addressed concerns he had not even realized existed. It provided both sides with genuine victories while requiring real compromises. It turned the dispute from a question of who won into a demonstration of how cooperation could benefit everyone. "But will they accept it?" he asked. Kate smiled, and for the first time since arriving at his office days ago, she looked genuinely relaxed. "They have already accepted it, Director." "Not officially, of course, but in our private conversations, both ambassadors indicated they could support this framework if it were properly presented. Now we just need to give them a way to say yes publicly without losing face." The formal presentation of the proposal 3 days later became a master class in diplomatic theater. Kate had worked with both delegations to craft their public statements, ensuring each could claim the framework as consistent with their original principles, while allowing for the compromises embedded within. The assembly chamber, so recently filled with tension and division, became a space for careful choreography as the agreement took shape. Ambassador Corinth spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of age and wisdom. "The Drazen Collective has always believed in the importance of honoring history," he began. "Our ancient achievements in the Hellion corridor represent a proud chapter in our species' story. We are gratified that this agreement recognizes those contributions in perpetuity, ensuring that future generations will understand and celebrate what our ancestors built. At the same time, we recognize that the galaxy has changed. The corridor now serves needs beyond any single species. Therefore, we accept this proposal for cooperative management, confident that it honors our past while serving our collective future." Ambassador Thurin followed with characteristic precision. "The Orathi Commonwealth's position has always been grounded in rigorous analysis and logical principle," he stated. Our archaeological research demonstrated the corridor's complex history, involving multiple species across vast spans of time. This agreement reflects that complexity, establishing a governance model based on scientific understanding rather than simplistic claims of exclusive ownership. We find this approach intellectually sound and practically superior to any alternative. The Commonwealth therefore endorses this framework. The chamber erupted in expressions of relief and approval from dozens of species who had watched the crisis with growing alarm. The agreement was not perfect, and everyone recognized it. Both the Drazen and Orathi had compromised significantly from their initial positions, but that was precisely the point. They had found a way forward that neither could have achieved through confrontation. In the weeks that followed, as the agreement was formalized and implemented, the story of humanity's role in resolving the crisis spread throughout the assembly. Kate Morrison became something of a celebrity, though she deflected attention with practiced grace. More importantly, the methods she had employed became subjects of intense study and discussion. Director Venn found himself hosting regular consultations with human diplomatic staff, learning about concepts that had seemed so alien just weeks before. Shuttle diplomacy, back-channel negotiations, confidence-building measures, proximity talks. These techniques, refined through humanity's long and often painful history of conflict, offered the Assembly new tools for addressing disputes that did not fit neatly into existing protocols. The Assembly's Council of Directors voted unanimously to upgrade humanity's status from provisional observer to full member, an unprecedented rapid advancement that reflected both gratitude and recognition of their unique contributions. Kate Morrison was offered a permanent position as special advisor for complex negotiations, which she accepted with characteristic humility. 6 months after the crisis, Venn stood once again at the observation deck overlooking the assembly chamber. The space looked much as it always had, but something fundamental had changed. The delegates below moved with greater ease, their conversations less rigidly formal. The chamber's architecture had not altered, but its purpose had evolved. It remained a place for transparent official proceedings, but now everyone understood it was not the only place where important work happened. Lyra joined him at the railing, her bioluminescent patterns showing calm satisfaction. "It is remarkable how quickly things have shifted," she transmitted. 3 months ago, I could not imagine the Assembly adopting human methods. Now they seem essential to our operations. Venn's mandibles clicked in agreement. "We built a system designed for rational actors in good faith disputes," he reflected. "It worked well for centuries because most conflicts fit that model. But humanity showed us that sometimes the greatest service a mediator can provide is creating space for parties to be less than perfectly rational, to voice doubts privately, to explore compromises without immediate judgment. There is wisdom in that we had not recognized." Below them, a new session was beginning. Representatives from 15 species gathered to discuss a territorial boundary dispute that had been festering for years. The proceedings followed traditional formats, transparent and official. But Venn knew that before they had reached this point, human mediators had spent weeks conducting quiet conversations, building trust, exploring options. The public session was important, but it was no longer the entire story. Kate Morrison entered the observation deck, moving with the easy confidence of someone who belonged. She had grown comfortable in the Assembly's corridors over the past months, though she never lost the slight air of external perspective that made her observations so valuable. "Director," she greeted Venn with a slight smile. "I wanted to thank you before I left." "Left," Venn repeated, surprised. "You are departing." "Just for a few weeks," Kate assured him. "I am returning to Earth to recruit additional staff. The Assembly has requested a formal human diplomatic training program, and we need more personnel to meet the demand. It seems our methods have applications beyond individual crises." Venn felt a warmth that his species rarely experienced. "Of course, take whatever time you need. The Assembly has functioned for 300 years. We can manage a few weeks without your guidance." Kate's expression grew more serious. "I want you to know, Director, that I never intended to change your system." The transparency and formality of the assembly serve vital purposes. What we have added are complementary tools, not replacements. Sometimes conflicts need public forums. Sometimes they need private space. The art is knowing which approach serves best in each situation. You gave us the ability to adapt, Venn said simply. That may be humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. Not any specific technique, but the understanding that there are many paths to resolution, and wisdom lies in choosing the right path for each unique situation. They stood together watching the session below, where representatives were engaging in careful diplomatic ballet, their formal statements shaped by the private understandings that had preceded them. The assembly had not abandoned its principles. It had expanded its capabilities. As Kate prepared to depart, Venn found himself reflecting on the strange path that had led them here. A desperate crisis, an unconventional solution, and a young species teaching ancient civilizations new ways to understand old problems. Humanity had emerged from their violent history with hard-won wisdom about conflict and resolution. They had learned that sometimes the path to peace required indirect approaches, private spaces, and the patience to let parties save face while finding common ground. The galaxy's diplomacy had not collapsed, despite the dire predictions just months ago. Instead, it had evolved, incorporating new methods that complemented its existing strengths. The assembly remained committed to transparency and formal process, but now understood these existed alongside other necessary tools. Public forums and private conversations, official positions and informal explorations, rigid protocols and flexible adaptation. Humanity's unforeseen answer had emerged not from superior technology or advanced philosophy, but from something simpler and more profound. They had learned, through countless difficult experiences, that peace often required giving people ways to change their minds without admitting they were wrong, to compromise without surrendering principle, to move forward while honoring the past. These lessons, born from humanity's tumultuous history, had proven surprisingly applicable to the challenges facing a galactic civilization. The chamber below continued its work, delegates from dozens of species navigating complex issues with renewed confidence. The crisis had passed, but its lessons remained. The galaxy had discovered that sometimes the most valuable contributions came from unexpected sources, that wisdom could emerge from any species willing to share their hard-won understanding. And in a small diplomatic office on the outer ring of Meridian Point, a young human woman prepared to return home, carrying with her the gratitude of a galaxy that had learned to appreciate the subtle art of finding peace in the spaces between positions, in the quiet conversations away from public scrutiny, in the patient work of helping adversaries remember they had once been partners. The assembly had faced its greatest crisis in 3 centuries and emerged stronger, more adaptable, more capable of addressing the complex realities of galactic coexistence. Not because humanity had replaced what existed before, but because they had shown how to expand it, how to add new dimensions to old frameworks, how to maintain core principles while embracing necessary flexibility. Director Venn watched the session below with satisfaction, knowing that the true measure of success was not any single agreement, but the evolution of the system itself. The assembly had learned to adapt, and that capacity for adaptation would serve them well in whatever challenges the future held. Humanity had given them not just solutions to immediate problems, but the understanding that there were always more approaches to discover, more wisdom to uncover, more ways to bridge the gaps between different perspectives and needs. The galaxy's diplomacy had not collapsed, it had transformed. And in that transformation lay hope for a future where conflicts could be resolved not through force or rigid adherence to failing protocols, but through creative application of hard-won wisdom, patient exploration of common ground, and recognition that sometimes the best path forward was one nobody had considered before. As the stars turned overhead, and the assembly continued its eternal work of holding civilization together across the vast distances of space. One truth had become clear to all who witnessed these events. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage not with weapons or wonders, but with something perhaps more valuable. They had brought the accumulated wisdom of a species that had learned, through painful experience, how to make peace when peace seemed impossible. And the galaxy, grateful for this unexpected gift, had welcomed them not as observers, but as partners in the endless work of building a civilization worthy of the stars.